Hey everybody, this is Anthony, and tonight we are going to talk about our favorite thing. What's our favorite thing? Linux. Yay! Now, before I get started, let me say a couple of caveats. First of all, it's been a long time since I've done a video, and I'm not doing a video tonight. This is what you get. You get an audio broadcast only. Mostly because I'm too lazy to set up a video and do OBS and all that, but also because this doesn't really need a whole video production. It just needs audio. Second of all, this broadcast is probably going to piss some of you off because, as you know, I'm a huge Linux fan, and right now I have to admit, family, that I'm a little bit disappointed. I'm a little bit hurt. I'm a little bit let down, and I think we need to sit down as a community and really have a talk. And that's what this rant, I guess, is going to be. So it's going to be an honest, open talk with those of you who want to have an honest, open talk. Now, for some of you, that's going to be calling me a dickhead and telling me to go sleep with my mom. I get that. Some of you are going to actually consider what I'm saying, and that's great. So we'll see how that goes. And lastly, if this is going to be a little ranty, maybe. And so if you're not into ranty videos, you might not want to stick with this. I'm going to try to keep it short. We'll see how it goes. So let's get started and we'll see. All right, so as most of you know, I'm a Linux guy. I've been a Linux guy for the past 17 years. Started with an obsession with Red Hat, the original Red Hat distribution, way back in the day. And it continues to my use of distributions like Ubuntu, SUSE, Red Hat still today, Fedora, all of the major distributions I either have used or am currently using in some form, either on the server or the desktop. And, at first I started using Linux on the server, just like most people, because Linux on the desktop kind of sucked. It was the hardcore geeks and the people that really didn't mind the pain of having to twiddle with the desktop for 3 weeks to get sound working, or a week to get an Ethernet driver or a Wi-Fi driver working. Those were the people that were running Linux on the desktop. And so I kind of avoided that for a while. I ran it on the server because it ran very well. But the desktop I didn't really get into till a little later. Let's say maybe 2005, 2006. And when I did get involved with the desktop, I started playing around with Debian. And then eventually I got involved with Ubuntu. And I fell in love. To me, Ubuntu was the greatest thing that could happen to Linux. Just period. It was easy to use. It was user friendly. It came in a pretty package, as far as like the user interface goes and everything. And it was finally a version of Linux that I could show my friends that looked really fantastic, and it just worked. There were some kind of gotchas every now and then, but for the most part, if I got the right hardware. And, I was willing to spend a little bit of time, not weeks, not days, sometimes a couple of hours, getting things, up and running. I could have a really stable system with some pretty great software. And so I pretty much standardized around Ubuntu, and I began using that pretty much as my daily driver in probably 2008, 2009. I still use some Windows, but for the most part, I was using Ubuntu pretty much daily in 2008, 2009. But I've always used Ubuntu since the early I've always used Linux since the early 2000s in some form, but daily on the desktop probably since 2009. And I have been a huge proponent of Ubuntu. When the Snowden revelations broke, and we found out that the U.S. government and the U.K. government, and let's face it, all of the governments are spying on us. But the first thing that I was there to tell my friends was, well, what do you expect? You're running an operating system that, you don't know what it's doing. You can't know what it's doing. Why don't you come over to Linux? And I had the perfect answer. It was Ubuntu. Come on over to Linux. Come on over to Linux. I'll help you set it up. We'll have install fast. We'll do everything. And I was gung-ho, man. I was absolutely just enthralled with Linux. I was one of the biggest unpaid evangelists that you will ever meet for Linux. And I'm also a software developer. And I really do believe that I should use my skill to make whatever platform I'm on better. And when I was on Windows, I spent a lot of time writing software to make my customers and my associates and anybody's life a little bit better by writing software. And so I started hearing one of the big complaints that you hear about Linux all the time is, yeah, I'd use Linux except there's no software available for it. There's not a lot of great software. And I had decided that I was going to single-handedly change that. I was going to write the great software. It wasn't going to be like Photoshop or things like that because I'm not an idiot. But I was going to write software that would make the desktop more useful. I'd write utilities. I'd write the stuff that you were still having to do from the terminal. I'd fill in those gaps and things like that. And I began writing software like a freaking madman. I mean, I was churning out tool after tool after tool, absolutely exhausting, right? And for the most part, I was doing really well. People were either buying my software if it was for sale, or they were downloading it. They were contributing to it. They were offering money as like support, to help develop. They were sponsoring features, the stuff you normally expect around open source software. And I admit some closed source software because I'm not completely opposed to closed source software. And so I was invested in Linux. In fact, at one point, I only used Linux. I got rid of Windows totally. Anybody who knows me probably went through the period about me making fun of Microsoft and me, ranting about how horrible it was and trying my best to convert people from Windows and Mac, but particularly Windows, to Ubuntu in particular. And then earlier this year, we started hearing rumors that Canonical, the people that were doing Ubuntu, weren't doing necessarily so well. We knew that desktop Linux, desktop Linux has always kind of struggled, right? Linux has dominated the server. Microsoft simply can't compete with Linux on the server. But on the desktop, Linux is kind of a crapshoot, right? More people use it now than ever before, but that more people using it now than ever before is still fairly minuscule. And so, we're maybe where Mac was in the very beginning, which is a good place to be, but still not the dominant force of computing. And so we knew that there was a problem with desktop Linux. And we knew that, the downloads were coming in. There was some good movement on vendor side. For example, Dell was doing some stuff with Linux. System 76, Pogo Linux, all of those people were doing fantastic things. And then Canonical, the company that makes Ubuntu, dropped a bombshell in April. And that was that they were, how can I put it? They weren't pulling out of desktop Linux, but they weren't all in with the enthusiasm that they had been since before. Now, I know there's some of you that are gripping your chest and reaching for the keyboard to make a comment saying that I'm lying and I'm miscategorizing Mark Shuttleworth's words. Let me explain. So, in an interview that Mark did, he basically said, look, we are, the dream of convergence is dead. That's not going to happen. And, pretty much if anybody does, it's going to be Microsoft because they are moving forward on that. The dream of our own display server through Mir is dead because we already have a display server, and there's another one coming up that's really good that everybody's kind of adopting. The dream of our own desktop is kind of useless because there's some really good desktops out there, and so we're going to scale our company back a little bit, right? We're gonna pull out of some of these projects that we've been working on that we were real passionate about. And that we got everyone excited about, that we pushed for the last 5 or 6 years. Now, the desktop is still really, really important to us. That's what Mark said. The desktop is really important to us. But here's the problem with that statement. While the desktop may be really, really important to Canonical, the problem is that everything they cut pretty much had to do with the desktop. Okay, they didn't cut anything really that affected the server. They didn't cut anything that affected the cloud. They cut things that affected the Linux desktop. And that was kind of troubling because, it meant that all of the hard work and the energy and the mind share and everything that was going into the desktop market was going to be pulled away. And let's face it, I know there's a lot of other distributions that are doing desktop Linuxes, okay? The truth is, I mean, if we're honest, Canonical really, I mean, Ubuntu is really all that matters, right? Nobody is really using Fedora. Nobody but developers are really using Fedora in their day-to-day stuff. Nobody's really using OpenSUSE in their day-to-day stuff. Nobody's using Red Hat or CentOS. I mean, yeah, developers are, but for the most part, if you walk into an office that's just, using Linux for whatever, you're not going to find anything but Ubuntu. So let's just lay that to rest. And so the big deal about Ubuntu pulling out of so much of the desktop was really concerning. And then, and so people began to speculate, is Ubuntu going to drop? Is Ubuntu going to drop their desktop? Is it just going to become a server operating system, and then they're going to kind of shuttle the desktop version of it over to the community, or more to the community, because it's a community project? And then a little later, Mark Shuttleworth came out, and he basically said that Ubuntu has failed on the desktop. Now, again, he didn't use that exact phraseology, and you can look it up. The interviews on Oh My God Ubuntu or OMG Ubuntu. But basically, he said, that it's failed on the desktop, and that it's not, it's not going to take over the world like he thought it would. Now, what he clarified is that in the West, and I think he actually said in the Western world, because Ubuntu's selling like gangbusters in places like India and China and places like that. You can go and you can buy a brand new desktop PC with Ubuntu on it right now, and it's kick-ass. It really is. But in the West, where we have options like Windows and we have better support and better internet and better this and better that, it's not so great. And what he basically said was that here in the West, Ubuntu is more of a developer's desktop. It's not really for the average person. And so that's really concerning. And what concerns me about that is because anytime I hear something is for developers, which I consider myself, keep in mind, right? I mean, I'm a developer. It generally means lower quality. Okay? I mean, developer tools are really great, but they're ugly. They don't, they often require a lot of manual setup. There's not a lot of thought that goes into them. It's kind of like, create the tool, toss it over the fence, let them figure it out. And I'm a little concerned with the statement with the statements from Mark Shuttleworth saying that Ubuntu is a great developer's desktop, that this may start to happen with Ubuntu. Like, is Ubuntu going to start defocusing on the desktop and start saying, okay, we're going to create, we're going to put together something developers can use to write software. It's going to be okay. It's going to be tolerable. It's going to be Ubuntu, but we're not going to focus on the polish and the prim that we have in the past, because developers don't need that. Those bastards will just use anything. And so with all of that going on, it was the perfect opportunity for a competitor to come in and strike hard, right where it hurts. And oh God, did it hurt. Because at the Build conference, or actually before the Build conference, Microsoft has a yearly conference called Build. But they announced this technology, and I have to admit, it's a great technology. But they announced this technology called the Windows Subsystem for Linux. Oh my God, folks, it's pretty mind-blowing. It is the entirety of Ubuntu, minus the kernel, running on Windows, which basically means that you can run any terminal-based application that runs on Ubuntu will run now on Windows unmodified. That includes services. That means that you have things like Bash, like cron, like Python, like ls, grep, awk, sed, all of that, all of your programming language. The entirety of Ubuntu userland is on Windows now, and it works pretty freaking flawlessly. And here's the thing. At Build last week, Microsoft said, we're not done. In other words, Ubuntu was just the beginning. We're now going to put Fedora, and we're going to put OpenSUSE on Windows. And so now you will have one dev box that will be your Windows machine, And you won't need to switch over to a virtual machine with Linux on it, because you know what? You'll have Linux running within Windows seamlessly with no additional resources, with no major overhead. This was a punch into friggin' kidneys for desktop Linux for the most part, because Microsoft still isn't going to touch Linux on the server, I don't think. But for the developer that's looking for a solid workstation, that's looking for a place where they can sit there and just like work and get things done and have kind of the best of both worlds. Like for a long time, I was running, Windows 10 side by side with Ubuntu, because there are times when I wanted Ubuntu, and because there were things that I needed to do that Ubuntu did really well, and then there are times that I wanted Windows because there are things that Windows does really well. Now I can have both, and not only do I can have both, but I can have both running at the same time without a VM, without this workhorse muscle PC, and it runs seamlessly. And I can't help but think that the year of Linux on the desktop might be on a Windows desktop. The best dev box that's out there for Linux might actually be Windows. And I don't know how to process that, to be honest, folks. I mean, everything that we have that's good within Linux, everything that we have, all the tooling and all of the great languages and everything, is slowly being sucked into other worlds. There's nothing compelling that makes Linux an arguable, besides freedom. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, if somebody were saying I'm looking for absolute privacy and freedom and blah blah blah, then I would say Linux. But the average user isn't going to say that. Let's get that out of our minds. The average user isn't going to go, I'm really, really happy with my Mac. I'm really, really happy with Windows, but damn, I miss freedom. And damn, I miss the not spying. Most users aren't going to do that. Most users don't care. And so, absent of that, what's the story for Linux anymore? What's the story that I can tell somebody, don't go and buy a $500 Windows box. Instead, go and buy this $900 Linux box, because it's going to cost more, because the hardware's not going to be subsidized at all, and it's going to be a better experience, because now they can just go and buy a Windows 10 box and have the best of everything. So it puts me in a bit of a dilemma, right? Because I'm not one of these people that's an activist as far as software goes. I don't really care necessarily if software is open source or not. I like open source software, don't get me wrong. I think it's a good thing, it's preferable, and in certain cases it's a necessity. But for the most part, I don't take the Stallman view of, I'm being imprisoned by software if it's not open source. I use the tools that I use the tools that I like. I use the tools that work well. And if those tools happen to be on Windows, then I'll use that. If those tools happen to be on Mac, I'll use that. And if those tools happen to be on Linux, fantastic, I'll use that. And I think most people are probably the same as me. So what is the compelling argument for Linux now? I used to be able to say two things, or three things. I used to be able to say privacy. I used to be able to say performance. And I used to be able to say tooling. So with Windows 10, I can't really say performance anymore, because Windows 10 is pretty damn performant. And I can't really say the tooling anymore, because even though Windows 10 isn't quite to the level that Linux is with its implementation of Linux, it's getting there. And the team that's working on the Windows subsystem for Linux is really, really working hard. They're a good team, and they're really working hard to get it to where it needs to be. And it's going to be absolutely kick ass very soon. And so what's left is, of course, privacy. And I know some of you always email me when I do these videos and say, well, what about stability? Windows crashes all the time. That's bullshit. Windows doesn't crash all the time. If you're crashing Windows all the time, then you're doing something wrong. I've been using Windows for the most part pretty solidly since Windows 3.1, and I have not gotten a Windows crash probably since Windows XP. I'm serious. And like I said, I'm a developer. I do crazy shit to my computer all the time, right? I write code that I know is going to crash a computer, and most of the time it actually doesn't. Windows can recover from it, right? So if you're one of these people that are just going to say, well, Windows is unstable, it's unusable, that's a lie. I mean, you're lying to yourself. So if we're honest with ourselves, what is the compelling use for Linux? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm still going to use Linux. I'm still going to advocate the use of Linux, right? And I'm still going to use Linux on the server. I'm still going to use Linux on the desktop. But I'm not sure that I can make as compelling or as enthusiastic of a case for Linux on the desktop to new users anymore, in light of everything that's changing. And we have so much going on in Linux on the desktop. We have the GNOME project is everywhere. Everybody's standardized. That's the crazy thing about this. We've got a situation where just about every major distro has standardized around a single desktop. There's so much mind share going in to developing the GNOME desktop right now that it's crazy. And we have vendors that are dumping thousands and thousands and millions of dollars into developing good hardware for Linux. I'm thinking Dell. I'm thinking System 76. I'm even thinking HP a little bit. And desktop Linux has never had a better chance of survival, has never had a better ecosystem than it does right now. And yet the major force, the major player in the space has said, we out. Now I know they haven't said that. They haven't said we're pulling out. They haven't said we're not going to make a desktop anymore. In fact, they've said the exact opposite. They're still going to make a desktop. But I think we can read the writing on the wall. Canonical is on the way out as far as a consumer-friendly Linux desktop goes. And there are a couple of other options out there. I'm thinking maybe Solus. OpenSUSE has some good stuff. But I feel that if anybody could have made it, if anybody could have pushed Linux over the top of the desktop, Canonical had the power, the marketing, the people, the money, the mind share, and the product to do it. And they couldn't do it. So who the hell is going to come in and do it now? And I was listening to a podcast that I love. It's called Linux Unplugged by Jupiter Broadcasting. Check it out. In fact, right now on your screen, under this video, you're going to have a URL to it. Check their stuff out. You're going to love it. But Chris Fisher for Linux Unplugged was kind of saying a little bit of the same thing. Like, we talk about bringing new users to Linux. We talk about bringing all this cool technology to Linux. And now it's one of those things where the story's not so great anymore. The story's not so compelling anymore. And at that point, you have to wonder what's going to happen to Linux. I mean, on the server, it's obviously going to keep getting better. It's obviously going to still, keep getting new users. And I mean, it's the default. I don't even think of Windows Server, to be honest. Whenever I have to set up a new server, I don't even think, should I use Linux or should I use Windows Server? It's automatically, Linux. And sometimes it's like, oh, well, maybe Windows Server would be better suited here, So on the desktop, on the server, Linux is pretty much locked in for just about everybody. But on the desktop, are we seeing the death of Linux on the desktop? Are we seeing the death of what amounts to free computing? Or here's an interesting thing. If Microsoft plays this right, could this new Microsoft that we're seeing, this Microsoft that's embracing everybody, embracing open source, embracing, Microsoft loves Linux, Microsoft loves open source, could they be the new freedom bringers? Now hear me out for a second, because this gets kind of weird if you think about it. But if Microsoft continues to go the way they are now, what if at some point Microsoft basically says, look, we're going to become, we don't care about Windows anymore, because I don't believe Microsoft does. Windows is not Windows is not that important to Microsoft anymore. It's the services that matter, right? And wouldn't it be awesome if Microsoft basically one day said, look, here's the deal. We're going to open source Windows. Or we're going to open source something like Windows or whatever, right? But probably open source Windows. And we don't care what you run, where you run it. We just want you to use our services. Because that could happen. Microsoft may be, the new Microsoft might actually be more free and present us with better options than our desktop Linux dream did. I'm just talking out loud here. I'm not saying that that's necessarily true. I'm just saying that that's a possibility. I don't know. I'm really kind of bummed about the way that Canonical has just pulled out of the desktop. And like I said, I know they haven't pulled out. I know they're still in it, but I don't feel that they're in it for the consumer. I feel they are in it for the server, the enterprise, and I don't fault them for that at all, right? I really, really don't. And I think that Canonical focusing on the enterprise is going to be a boon for people like me, developers, right? Because the enterprise needs good software. And this is just going to give us an opportunity to write new software and do some exciting things. But for those of us who are enthusiasts of Linux on the desktop, it's kind of the passing of an era. Or maybe I'm just old and, kind of lamenting, one of these people that are sitting here lamenting my youth. I don't know. But what do you think? Do you think that, I'm really curious to hear your guys' take on this. I mean, do you think I'm crazy? Do you think that this is just a blip in the road and Linux on the desktop is going to be stronger than ever? There's going to be somebody else that's going to come in and be the savior. Who do you think is going to be if it is? Is it going to be, my bet, if I had to say somebody else is going to fill Canonical shoes, I've been playing with OpenSUSE and I have to say they're pretty damn slick. And so I'd say maybe OpenSUSE, but I don't really see that either. But I'm curious to hear what you guys in YouTube land are thinking. How do you feel about it? I'm just a bit bummed. And I think a lot of us out here in Linux land are bummed. And the funny thing is, I say this as I sit here in front of my computer and I record not on Linux, but on a Windows 10 computer. Yeah, that's the thing. And I don't feel guilty about it. I feel like this is the best place that I could be right now. How times have changed, folks. How times have changed.